Hello everyone, today we're talking about settings. It doesn't really matter if you have a camera or a phone, and I will explain mostly using the camera, but I will also show a little bit with the phone, but anything that I explain here could be applied to phones as well. So I have a camera in my hand, I will go straight to settings and tell you all the things it's better you check and double check before actually pressing record. So first of all, check the video system, depending on if you are in a PAL country or an NTSC country. So most of the European countries are PAL, and the States and all Americas are NTSC. This is something that used to be really important back in the days when the content that you do on a video should be sent to a television broadcaster and be broadcasted, and because there are two actual systems of television. Nowadays that mostly share content online is not really very important, but still there are some things that it's better to consider, especially if you're shooting indoor with the light. The light goes together with the video system you choose. So if you are in a PAL country and you're shooting in higher frame rates that are allowed for NTSC, you might have some problems with flickering lights. That is an effect that you really don't want. So if you're shooting indoor with lights, it's better you really stick with that. If you're shooting outdoor, it's not that important. So depending on your country, choose your option. Then at this point, according to the option you chose, you will get probably different options when you go to the actually video recording modes. For example, now I'm going to the movie recording quality, where basically you can choose between the 4K or Full HD or whatever resolution you want. So here you have to take different decisions. So the first decision is if you want to shoot in 4K or in Full HD. So here it totally depends what you're shooting. So the thing is, if you're shooting very short clips, B-roll, I will explain over and over what is B-roll, but let's say very short clips, and it's advisable to choose the highest resolution possible, in this case 4K, even if you won't really either deliver to a client in 4K or you won't upload in 4K. But 4K gives you some extra possibilities. For example, you can punch in without losing quality, so that means that you can crop the image more, almost the double in a Full HD timeline. So that's a good option. There's an extra tip I want to give you, and it's, for example, when I'm shooting long classes like yoga classes, fitness classes, someone doing a workout. So this is something that could be a good advice even for the ones among you who are filming yourself, placing just the camera on a tripod. So if you shoot 4K, it gives you the option basically of having not two angles, but at least two crops with just one camera. So what happens is that you just place one camera, let's say in front of you, on parallel to the mat, or 45 degrees, whatever option you will like. We will explore angles and composition in the next class. But the option you will have is to crop whatever is needed. So let's say you're doing something, you make a mistake. At this point, you can just cut and then come back to the same frame. but it's not really nice. Instead, if you do a mistake or you just want a break and drink a glass of water or whatever, and you have shot in 4K, you could crop it and it looks much better because the two scenes are not the same crop, so it doesn't look like a jump cut, it's just a normal cut. So it's much more harmonious and much nicer, especially if you shoot yoga and fitness classes, and especially if you want using only one camera, or you use two cameras but you want an extra crop. So doing like that is almost you using three cameras. You always have an extra camera just with the cropping. The other thing you really have to think about it's frame per second. This is very important. If you check advices from YouTubers, they will say, oh, I shoot all my content in 60 frames per second. Yes, it has its own reasons, but again, it depends what is your content. So I explain briefly. Frame per second are the different frames that fits in 1 second. So it's like there are still pictures one after the other, and all these still pictures put one after the other, they make the video. So that's why photography and videography are not that different, actually, in my opinion. So what happened? If you're shooting 25 frames per second, for example, you will have 25 pictures to make 1 second footage. If you're shooting 60 frames per second, you have 60 pictures to make 1 second footage. If you have 25 pictures instead of 60, you have this thing that is called motion blur. Motion blur is very evident if you have to shoot something or someone who is very fast. Wildlife, runners, bikers, skaters. So in all these cases I would suggest shoot in 60 frames per second. But if you had to shoot a person, for example, doing yoga, their movements were not that fast. So maybe shooting 24-25 frames per second is more than enough. Another reason to shoot 60 frames per second is because you want to slow down the footage. If you're shooting a whole yoga class or a whole workout, 1 hour, you won't slow it down. You want to show it exactly in the speed that is recorded. So also in this case, 24-25 frames per second is enough. 99.9% of the people won't notice the difference. So thing you have to consider deciding your frame rate, it's the space that it will take in your memory cards, because the higher FPS you choose, the more space in your memory is taken. Let's see, it shows it very clearly on your phone. So you go to camera, and then here it gives you the option. And this is interesting. So here you really understand it. So if you're shooting in 4K at 24 frames per second, it will take 135 megabytes for every minute of video recorded. If you shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, it will take 400 megabytes for every minute recorded. So this is something you have to consider. If you're shooting a whole yoga class of 1 hour or more, shooting at 60 frames per second, it will be huge files. So I suggest to avoid it, stick to the 24-25 frames per second, and leave the highest FPS for B-roll and promo videos and stuff like that. So another important thing is that the value that you have chosen will affect the whole settings of your camera, because, for example, exposure, as you probably know, it's made of shutter speed and aperture, and of course ISOs as well. But a rule is that the shutter speed has to double the value of a frame per second. So what does it mean? If you're shooting at 25 frames per second, you have to choose a 1/50th shutter speed. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you have to choose a 100th shutter speed. So you will notice that when you choose a 150 shutter speed, there's more light coming in your scene. When you're shooting a 1/20th shutter speed, you have to change the aperture. You have to open more the aperture or push up the ISOs. So if you're shooting in a dark environment or you don't have very good artificial light, so it's much wiser to shoot in lower FPS, so also the value of your shutter speed will have a lower number, so you get more light in the frame. So once you've chosen your shutter speed, the other value is aperture. Aperture, it's the value that is responsible, again, on how much light is coming to the frame. An open aperture will result normally in blurred backgrounds, and a closed aperture will give you kind of this effect where everything is on focus. Again, choose these according to what you have to do. There's not a general rule. I can't say it's better to shoot in an open aperture rather than a closed aperture. It always depends. It always depends what you have to do. Generally, when I take photos, I really love the open aperture. When I shoot videos, I'm a little bit more conservative. And I explain you why. Because even if I'm shooting with cameras with very good autofocus, or I'm using a cinema camera, and I also have a focus puller, let's say that subjects usually are moving, and you're also moving sometimes when you do the shots, especially if you shoot on a gimbal. And so what happens? It's very hard to keep the focus. So if you choose an aperture value that is 1.4, something like that, very open aperture, you know, the subject can just move a little bit and goes autofocus. Even with very good autofocus system like this, it's a Canon R5, it's really amazing dual pixel autofocus. But still, I feel that if you choose values above 4, f4, like 5.6, I think I usually find it very safe. It will result in crisper images. So all these things will affect your exposure of the image. That means the quantity of light you will get. And another point you will have to think about it is the ISOs. So this, it totally depends on your camera. If you know you bought a camera that has very good low light capabilities, you can push the ISOs more. Otherwise, it's better not to push them too much, otherwise you will get a lot of noise in the images. When you shoot with log, for example, C-Log3 starts at 800 ISOs. So it's something you have to consider, so you also need ND filters in that case to have a correct exposure. Log is the flattest profile possible. The footage, let's say, doesn't look good at all when you see it on the camera, but then you can post-produce it a lot. So you can almost always save the footage or make changes, let's say, but huge changes. If I'm not shooting log, picture style, I choose neutral, so I can change things a little bit more in post. Otherwise, another option, of course, it's using log. That's all for today. These are the settings that I recommend, but explore your camera, find your way into all these numbers, and have fun.